Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author, Danielle Girard. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Hello, and welcome to Killer Women Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air global network with more than 4 million listeners. I am your host, suspense author Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Laura McHugh. Laura is the award-winning, internationally best-selling author of The Weight of Blood, Arrowood, The Wolf Wants In, What's Done in Darkness, and the forthcoming Safe and Sound, which Heather Gudenkauf called beautifully written, unflinchingly told, and relentlessly suspenseful, which I agree fully. The Weight of Blood won the International Thriller Writers Award and the Silver Falchion Award for the best first novel, and the Missouri Author Award for fiction. Her most recent release, What's Done in Darkness, won the Missouri Literary Award, was named a Best Book of the Summer by the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and Self Magazine, and was Harlan Coben's pick for Best Summer Thriller on the Today Show. McHugh lives in Columbia, Missouri with her daughters. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and get to chat with you.
I know, it's so exciting. And we met, was it about VoucherCon? I feel like we were sitting at a dark table. Oh, Minneapolis.
Probably. I don't know.
They all kind of start to run together. Okay. Well, there's so much fun stuff. And I have a quote I love. I already read a quote. If you missed the quote I read on my Instagram, go back and listen. It's on Facebook too, because Laura's writing is so beautiful and she paints the picture of this town so fabulously. Before I gush, Laura, tell us a little bit about Safe and Sound.
Yes, like most of my books, it's set in a creepy small town in the Midwest. This one's in rural Missouri. There's a meat packing plant at the center of the town, and it's just kind of this dead-end town that people do not leave. You live your whole life there, and you die there, and you're buried there. So the book is about these two sisters. Their older cousin was going to be the first in their family to go to college. She was on the verge of getting out of this town, and she was babysitting them and vanished from their farmhouse overnight, leaving some blood behind. And so it's, the girls are a little older now and they're trying to find a way out of town themselves. And some human remains are found and they're just trying to figure out finally what happened to their cousin.
It is as Heather said, you are a really beautiful writer. I'm embarrassed that this is my first Laura McHugh book, but it will not be my last. And God, your accolades, clearly this is not your first fabulous book. I'm going to read a little quote from the very beginning because it totally captures the way this town is, which I love. This is about the girl's Aunt Elsie, who is Grace's mom, and she holds a vigil every year for Grace. And Aunt Elsie held the vigil every year, and every year she said we'd bring Grace home. But the ironic part was that what Grace had wanted most was to get away from here. She was always telling me and Kylie that we had to get out before we got stuck, that there was no life for us in Beaumont. There was no choice but to leave and not look back. Otherwise, we'd be married and pregnant and working at the meatpacking plant before we were old enough to buy beer. We didn't really get it back then. We were only 10, 11 years old when she disappeared, but I did now. Cutting roads circled around town, from the hospital to the meatpacking plant to the graveyard. And that was life in Beaumont from start to finish. You were born at Beaumont Hospital, or Beaumont General, worked at Savor Meats, and then ended up in Beaumont Memorial Cemetery. It was like the kiddie car ride at the county fair, where you've got your own steering wheel and you can turn it all you want, but there's only one way to go, the track laid out before you got there. So wonderful. And like you said, these small creepy towns, and you're in Missouri, so of course we want to extrapolate that you're in some small creepy town. I'm sure you're not. But so what is it about play? Like, you clearly writing about place is a very important thing. The Beaumont it's fully its own character and beautifully drawn. So what makes that feel, important and real for you?
Yeah. So, I grew up in the Midwest and the Ozarks, and I moved down to a very isolated part of rural Missouri, Ozark County, down by the Arkansas border when I was young. And it was kind of like a big culture shock. There were no other people around. We were out in the wilderness and it was a little bit scary, a little bit intimidating to me, but it's like a beautiful, rugged area. And so I always just found it interesting, the landscape, like it's gorgeous but remote. So it's kind of intimidating. And just that small town feel, you're kind of isolated, but it's like you're in this boiling pot, with these other people. You're all like really kind of interconnected in a lot of different ways, both good and bad when you're in a small town. And certain crimes that can happen in a small town. I mean, it really touches so many people and radiates out because everyone knows each other, they're related to each other, or whatever. So for me, just kind of that setting and that environment has always been like really fertile ground for crime stories, and just kind of that tense feeling like you're kind of stuck here in this remote kind of scary place.
And of course, we want to imagine, I think, in these small towns that the crimes come from outside. It's like In Cold Blood, right? Two guys come in to this, peaceful town, and they're the bad guys, and then they don't come from there. And yet the reality is, right? I mean, there are crimes that happen from outside, people driving through or whatever, but a lot of the times, arguably most of the time, the crimes happen from within. And so then not only in a small town, this like boiling pot, like you said, but you're in there with a bunch of people who have very, very dark secrets. And there are some very, very dark secrets in this book, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Which is another thing you love. You clearly love dark secrets. So now when this story came to you, how did it come together? Was it Grace, missing that emerged, or was it, this Kylie and Amelia wanting to get out? Sort of, how do your stories kind of come together?
Yes, usually how my novels come together, I'm often inspired by true crimes, and often like crimes that have happened here in the Midwest, in the small towns where I've lived. There are just so many creepy crimes here, and it's true, and it's kind of scary. But with this one, it wasn't a crime that took place here, but I had remembered reading about this crime where a babysitter was horribly murdered in this house, and the parents come home and there's this brutal murder scene, and they had their two daughters were there, and they assume they're dead or whatever. They don't know, they can't go in the house. And then the two sisters are found like in their room, and they were fine, they were asleep. And so this horrible brutal crime had happened right there, and somehow they were untouched. And so I was kind of fascinated with that scenario, and I'm thinking like, how would they feel, especially as they get older, and knowing like this had happened right there, they were spared somehow, but also horribly traumatized, and how would that affect you? And so that was a little seed for it that kind of started out. And then I'm always writing about these small towns, and it's always like either the desire to escape or something that's pulling you back, like you've gotten out and it's pulling you back in. And just because, having lived in these small towns, obviously I don't live anymore in the small towns where I'm from, but a lot of people stay, and people are always like, oh, you should move out of there, it's a dead end town, there's no jobs, it's full of crime, like you should leave. But it's way harder than that. Like if you've known nothing else and you have no connections outside of that community, it is really hard for people to actually change their lives and leave. It's a lot harder than people think.
Yeah. And you see the struggles. You see the struggles. Absolutely. We talked about this a tiny bit before we got on, before we started recording, about how it seems a little harder for the women to get out. There's this idea that, and maybe that's sort of our familial, and this is a gross generalization. I like to make gross generalizations about women because that's what I want to focus on, the women. But I do notice, like, for instance, Amelia, who is the older sister, will not leave without Kylie, right? She wants her sister to go. And Grace was sort of their cousin as well as their babysitter. So this role model for them. And then of course, Grace disappears. So they believe very strongly that she never got out, right? Because if she'd gotten out, she would have reached out to them at some point. So and it feels hard to leave that town without knowing what happened to her. And of course, like, it's education, it's opportunity, it's money. Money is a huge, these women are working at, they're working at the Waffle House. What is it? It's not the Waffle House. It's
the Waffle House. Yeah.
It's the Waffle House.
Plant and
the meat. Right. And they're just trying to scrape together enough. And then of course things happen, like their mom's behind on rent. And, it does seem so much more difficult than then. And I thought it was interesting that the two characters who we know are going to get out of that town, one who's already gone, who was a friend of Grace's, and in Grace's year, he's, you know, going to medical school, and the other, and the other one is, you know, is a friend of Amelia's who's going into the army. And yet and that's almost it, right? For the whole story, this whole town, those are the two people that we see leave. So, you know, does it seem like it's a bigger, I mean, in real life or in fiction, do we feel like it's a bigger struggle for the women, and why?
Yeah, and it can be. And I think like the small towns that I lived in, it was like, if you were going to get out of there, the ways to do it, like my family was really poor, you know, I didn't have anything going for me except like I was good at school. And so to go to college, like that was one way, or join the military. And so like all my brothers and sisters, it was either you're going to figure out you're going to go to college, or you're going to join the military, because that's the only way you're going to do anything, you know, with your life, to do anything different. You have to make that change. And so, in this case, you know, it was the guy that ends up going to college. You know, everybody in school was always encouraging him on, oh, he's going to be a doctor, he's going to do this and that. You know, he's on the football team, he's going to succeed. Oh, we want him to do all this. And whereas Grace, the girl, they're more like, stop trying to get in the way of him and all his grand things he's going to do, like kind of back off. And that comes from real life. I had a teacher in high school who was like that, and it drove me crazy.
Sure.
And it was just like, I just felt like constantly having to fight to prove like I'm as good or better, you know, as any of you, and I'm gonna get out, I'm gonna do these things, you know. So I did notice that a little bit. Of course, that was many years ago when I was in school, and I hope things have changed for women somewhat. But at the time when I was in school, it was very much like that. It's like, he's going to be the star. Like, stop trying to get a better grade than him and come out on top. Like, just you sit in the back of the room and you know, let us do our man thing up here. And very frustrating.
And there is, of course, and there is the sense, I think, that, you know, families depend on, I mean, and again, we do speak in generalizations. There are very many wonderful examples of this not being the case, but there are situations where you know, women are considered the ones who will take care of their parents, so they should not leave, right? They're needed in town.
Exactly.
And we see that, I think, with Amelia and Kylie's mom, right there, and she's not the one saying to them, you can get out, you can do this, right? And neither really was Grace's mom. They were saying, you know, you're probably going to end up like me, you know. And it really does take them, you know, digging in and being like, we can do this. And I think, you know, Amelia feels like she's clinging to her younger sister, like, we're going to do this together, because of course it feels much less scary to imagine doing that with somebody. And it is like, this is, I mean, either one of those options for somebody who grew up in a small town with, you know, a provincial outlook on things and not a lot of real life big experiences, college and the military would seem hugely intimidating, right?
Oh yeah. And there's also like this prevalent thing where it's like, oh, you think you're better than us? You think you need to get out of here? You think this isn't good enough? You think our life isn't good enough, and you're better and you need something better? There's a little bit of that attitude at times. And in this story, for sure, their family is like, you know, you should be here helping us out. And why do you think that you deserve to have, you know, you're going to do something better, and like, we're not good enough?
Yeah, don't get too big for your britches, kind of thing.
Yes.
And so I think that's the what we see is that the men get to speak more openly about their ambitions and their goals, and the women, you know, and Grace too had to really keep that kind of quiet so that people didn't get in her way even more, right? Because that was the impression was that the more she sort of talked about her goals, the more people wanted to really squash them, right? And and then there's this sense of like, you know, families come live together. So, you know, an uncle moves in, so there's all these layers of, you know, adults around who sometimes are safe and sometimes, you know, and helpful, and sometimes are a little bit sketchy, or, you know, give us a different impression. And so as these girls are growing up, it's like, who do we believe? You know, who do we believe? And I think that's true as well for kids, you know, who maybe don't have a two parent household, and they're other adults that have different perspectives, adults who aren't parents, who aren't, Yeah, it's really interesting. Um, so tell us about your process, because now it sounds like you're working full time. We are seeing Laura in her day office with some beautiful art that I'm assuming was maybe done by one.
I
Who
didn't
is
make
that?
that. No, but
You did.
one of my coworkers on a team building thing painted this,
I love
and
that.
it was
It's
really
great.
cool.
It's very
It's so
bright
cute.
and cheery. Yeah, it
It is.
totally
I
is.
know. It's happy. It makes me smile.
Yeah, which is
Yeah,
important. And you've
for
got
sure.
two young girls. So,
Well, yeah, they're in high school now. So one
okay,
of them
so
is a
not,
high school senior and one's a freshman.
you're
So
getting there.
yeah, getting there, getting really close.
Yeah.
But yeah, like my writing process, I mean, and it's changed from book to book. I'm writing, I guess, my sixth book right now. So yeah, like when my kids were little, that's when I wrote my first book when I had a newborn and a toddler and started writing. And so I would write, like in the middle of the night when everyone was asleep and
Yeah.
just whatever spare moment I could grab. And I was definitely a pantser and I didn't know what I was doing. And I was just like my first book was halfway through before I knew where the book was going.
Mhm.
But now, like gosh, 6 months ago, I started a job. I'm doing technical writing during the day now. So it's kind of interesting because now I have to figure out when am I fitting in all of my
Other
fiction writing.
stuff.
So it's like
Yeah.
at lunch or at night after work, weekends. So it does kind of feel like I have two jobs, but
Well,
or maybe three
three.
because my
I was gonna
kids are
say,
like a
yeah.
third job for sure.
They really, I'm sorry
But
to say that mine are
yeah,
out of the house and they're still like a third job. I love them, but
really.
they never really, yeah, sorry. It's less of it's a smaller third job. It's more part-time,
Well, and I
but
feel like when the youngest is about to turn 15, but when she's 16 and then able to
yes,
drive, that'll be
it
different. She works
it
at Dairy Queen
does.
now, so I drive her to work. I pick her up,
Yes, yes.
yeah,
But then you can get
a
a
lot of
chocolate
driving.
blizzard, a chocolate extreme.
Right. I know
I
the
know
ice cream
exactly.
cakes. So,
Yeah, I know exactly what I would get
yeah.
as I picked up my daughter from Dairy Queen if that's where she worked. But no, right, you're the chauffeur as well as sort of all the other things,
Yes. Yeah.
and that's a lot. That's a lot. So when you said when you finished, got halfway through your first book, which I think everybody's
Hmm.
first book is sort of a hot mess experience, right? You don't know what you're
Yeah.
doing. You've never done it before. Did you then get through halfway and say, "Oh God, I don't like"? How did you handle that at that point? What did you do?
Yeah. So I was halfway through. I didn't realize the problem was I didn't realize what the crime had been. Like I knew someone was missing and I knew someone was dead and I didn't know what had happened to them. And about halfway through, I realized I figured it out. I figured out the answers because there was a real crime that had happened down in the area where I'd gone to high school. And there was something about that clicked with me. And I was like, oh my gosh, this all makes sense. And I know what happened to both of these women. And then I was very quickly like writing the rest of the story. But in The Weight of Blood, there are two different timelines and there are multiple narrators. It's different people in this town, like in both timelines. It's the same people in this town, both timelines, but there's like a mother and daughter narrator in the two timelines. And so multiple timelines, multiple narrators, all of this stuff. And my very first book. And so I was like, what was I thinking? Like, why did I think this was gonna, what was I doing? I don't know. Thought I was telling the story. I thought it was the best way to tell the story, but it's
Mhm.
pretty complicated. And so I was like printing out everything and I had each chapter with like a note card on it. And it was like, who's the narrator, which timeline, which important things happen in this section. And I had to weave together
Yeah.
all the different pieces. So I had it printed out and then putting it together kind of like a puzzle. And weirdly, I mean, I feel like it's a miracle that I don't know how I did that. I had like no sleep. I had little babies and I don't know. And somehow I figured that out. And it was like when the book actually sold, I mean, it was like I was like in shock. Like I had no idea how things would go. Because things went really well for that first book.
I
And
was gonna say, not only
I
did it
was
sell
very
it,
lucky.
yeah.
Yeah, it went well. So that was like crazy and scary and lucky and all of that. And then I had one of my foreign contracts was like for two books. And so I knew I had to write a second book. And then I sold it, my second book here in the US, before I had written it and all this. So then it was like, okay, now I have deadlines. Now I'm actually,
Yeah.
people are waiting on this. And that's different a
Yes.
little bit for your
Yes.
writing when you have that. And so just trying to feel like, how can I make this process better? Because I can't just wander around like writing half
Right.
the
Because
book,
it
not knowing what's going to
exactly.
happen. at
It
this
takes
point.
much longer. You don't
Yeah.
you don't feel like you have that freedom. So yeah. So
Right.
how did your process change?
Yeah. Well, so I thought, okay, I'm going to outline. I'll just be an outliner now. That's what I'm going to do. And so I made an outline. Oh, it was horrible. It was horrible.
Yeah.
It took all the joy out of it. And I just felt like I was trying to write from point A to point B. And
Yeah.
it didn't work for me. So I threw that out, started over. And so at this stage, what I do a much looser sort of outline. Like I want to know where I'm going. And I have an idea, where will these characters end up? Like, what is their journey? What was the point of this whole thing? What is the crime? Who did it? And just have kind of this loose structure, which helps me. And it can still change while I'm writing. Sometimes it just does, but it helps me just to kind of know where I'm going. So I have to think that through a little bit more upfront
Yeah.
now.
Which is smart. I mean, I'm like
Yeah.
16 books in. I still get like halfway through a book and I'm like, oh, damn it. I made a wrong turn like at 20,000
Yeah.
words and I have to go back. I mean, it is
Yeah.
interesting. Like, I think obviously a pantser too. Otherwise I wouldn't have that problem. But I do think there's something really true about what you say about outlining. And people do it and they swear by it and they're great at
Mm-hmm.
it and they produce beautiful books. But for me,
Yeah.
it's like part of the joy of the book is finding out what it's about. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
no, I would love to be an outliner, but I really can't do it. So let's talk about mothers and daughters. You brought that up, but I think that is also, and it sounds like from your books, this is like a thing for you.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously you are a mother with two daughters and also a
Right.
daughter, with a mother.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
what sort of, what is interesting about exploring that? Because obviously it's such a powerful, complicated bond.
Yes. Yes. And a lot of the mothers that I write are complicated people who are maybe not the best mothers. Um, and it's funny because my mom, she's like, whenever I'm going to an event or something, she's like, you have to tell those people the mother is not based on me. Like, you have to tell them it's not me. None of those mothers are me. It's so funny. Like,
We
she's
sort
very,
of
very good
assume,
at things
but I'm
that.
glad to hear that.
Right.
Tell your mom
Yeah.
it's been publicized.
Yes. Now I have said it on the,
Exactly.
Killer Women. So everybody's going to know that it's not you. But yeah, it's just fascinating to me because it's a whole interesting thing. Like then when you become a mother and you have these kids and it's like you really don't have control over this little person and how they're wired and what they're going to do. And you think they might be sort of similar to you, and maybe in some ways they are, but then in a lot of ways you're just not prepared for how that's going to go. And also you might have an idea how you'll be as a mother. And then when you're a mother, things can change. And you're
Right.
like, oh my gosh,
Yes.
you just don't know. And so to me, it's just a really fascinating relationship because there's that bond, this person gave birth to you or you gave birth to these little people, and it's just a really complex sort of relationship that you can explore in so many different ways. And just
And
often
it's
these, yeah,
yeah, and it's not even always like the mother. Like in some ways, Grace was a mother figure
yeah,
for, Amelia and Kylie in terms of encouraging them to to grow up and leave town, and also
yeah,
encouraging like worrying about their safety and all those things. So
right.
there's also that interesting idea of like, to be a mother or to mother someone, do we have to give birth to them, or is
Hmm.
it like, I
Right.
mean, is an adoptive mother the same as, but it's true what you said.
Yeah.
And like you look at, and I've forgotten Amelia and Kylie's mom's name.
Oh God, you think I would remember?
Right. Okay. Well, whatever. Is it? No. Anyway, I
Why?
don't remember. Elsie. No,
Why
I
don't
know.
I know?
I shouldn't have brought
No.
it up, but she's,
Is it Shannon? Shannon. I
yeah,
think
that is
Shannon is their
Shannon.
mom. Yeah.
Shannon, you're totally right. Elsie and Shannon. Thank you. Because I was like, well, and what if I put you on the spot and you can remember, which to everybody listening, that does happen. Like, because
Yeah.
like
I
Laura's
can't.
in the middle of a brand new book. She's got
Mm-hmm.
new mothers she's naming. And all of a sudden you're like, I don't remember
Yep.
what her name is, which also goes to say it's
That
definitely not,
happens to me all the time.
it's not your mother, because if it was your mother, you
Right.
would 100% remember her name. But anyway,
Yeah.
I mean, Shannon is, she is such a different character. And I think we have, even those of us who kind of waited to have children and were married for a while, you think, oh, I'm ready. Like I got this all lined
Mm-hmm.
up. I'm a little bit more secure in my job and whatever. And then you have them and you're like, oh, I was fully not prepared. Like I was
Yeah.
fully not prepared. I was not prepared to not sleep. I was not
Right.
prepared to like have this thing cry and not know how to. I mean, you can really see. I can absolutely see how, particularly single mothers, how they just lose it, like how they just cannot
Yeah.
handle it. And at least I feel like in our country, and I don't know, I can't speak for other countries. I don't feel like there's a very good system in place for like, hey, you're having a rough time, mom. Here's a group you could join.
Right.
Here's a place where you could safely drop your child for a few hours so you can go back to sleep. And oftentimes because of the economical situations, they're also
Yeah.
working, right? You can't afford life on one salary, so you've got people who are not sleeping, working full time. I mean, God, operating heavy equipment, I don't know, but it's like, it's terrifying, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
We're
yeah.
just
And it sounds,
expected to go on and do everything we need to do.
yeah,
Yeah, it's
not to
hard.
mention like how it changes your body, right? I mean,
Oh yeah.
that's what's so like, you are literally, it's like going through a major car accident and then being in charge of a child. Like you're, not physically maybe, but your body, like your hormones and
Oh
and
yeah.
partially your body, like it is so, and I feel like, nobody even really gives it, or I didn't feel like when I was a new mom, was anybody like, okay, this is going to be really hard. They were just like, oh, what a cute baby. How are you doing? How's work? I'm like, you're like, oh my God, it is so, so, so crazy. So,
Yeah.
and especially when there's less, fewer resources, it's even harder. So it sounds like you're from a
Right.
very big family.
I am. Yeah, I'm the youngest of 8 kids, and I have at least like 100 first cousins. I have large family. Yep.
100
Yeah.
first cousins.
Yeah, my dad had like 12 brothers and sisters, and they all had like 14, 12, 10 kids. So yeah, we were one of the smaller families
That
with
is
8 kids.
amazing.
Yeah,
That's a lot of children.
it
Um,
is.
yeah, and so I mean, so right, imagine your mom, like she's right, you're by the time you come around, she
Mhm.
is,
Oh yeah, yeah, zoned out a little bit.
well, so, I mean, she'd have to be. How would she would
Yeah,
not survive
that's
the
how you
day.
survive. Yeah.
I think that's right. And that's why it's like interesting now, like back when we were little, parents would open their doors and be like, go outside and come back before dinner. And now,
Oh yeah.
the world is so different. Like you have to know where your children are, and there's a lot
Right.
of, it's so the pressures are even greater, I think.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. So, um, I'm trying to think, like I have so many little wonderful things I would love to unweave in this book, but I can't because you have to go and read this book. So, can you tell
Mhm.
us a little bit about what you're working on, or do you feel like you jinx it when you're?
I
I don't
can. I
want
can
to
tell you a
jinx
little
it.
bit.
Okay.
And this book needs to be done pretty soon. It's due in a couple months. I'm not done yet, but I'm working on that. So
Okay.
yes, book 6 is set again in an isolated rural place. It's right on the edge of the Mark Twain National Forest in southern Missouri, where it's like literally like a million acres of uninhabited forest. And so I took some inspiration from a couple of true crimes from where I had lived. One of those was a boy in the grade beneath me in high school. When we were in school, he shot and killed all of his younger brothers and sisters one night. He was babysitting them, and he murdered them all. And that was a really, just for that to happen when you're in school and just thinking that
Oh,
through, it was a really crazy, crazy kind of thing. So the main character in this story, she is a survivor of a family massacre. And so she is having to go back to sell like their family house that's in the middle of nowhere. And a young woman, shows up on her doorstep barefoot in the middle of nowhere. And she's like, where did you come from? Should I let you in? You know what's going on. And so I'll just say that much. And so it's kind of like you're out in the middle of nowhere and someone shows up, and what do you do? And she has kind of like this traumatic past, obviously,
yeah.
trying to work through that her sibling shot all the rest of her family and had murdered them. And she still doesn't really know exactly like why that
Why?
happened, like what set that off. So yeah.
Ah, it's like just such a perfect pressure cooker situation. I absolutely love that. I kind of, I'm sure people have said this to you before, but I can see these as movies, right? I mean, you're just in these. I mean, that's what we all want to do, right? We want
Oh,
our books to
right.
be movies, but like
Mm-hmm.
and the town itself, but also like out where they go to the, where they sort of go and party, and the little cabin that is in Grace's ex-boyfriend's family, like all that stuff, it just adds these layers. Because of course, that's what I mean. I live in Montana, and I know from my children's experience what you do as a teenager in a relatively small town is you go to some isolated place, you light a bunch of stuff on fire, and you drink, right?
Exactly. That's what you do.
All good things come from that, right?
Yes.
Which is different than what I did growing up, because I grew up in a city. So it's but yeah, so you just see how this, and it is interesting also to note in reference to your new book, but also in reference to the books that you've written, how much pressure there is on each individual person in these environments, right? Especially as you said, when you're poor, it's the amount of pressure that's on the parents, the children, everybody. What happened with the kid who was below you in school is horrible, but these environments are so rife with the kind of situations that really just make people kind of break, right? You put everybody, and again, it sort of makes me think about the ways in which we don't do a good job of supporting people in our country. But anyway, not to get political, but there's just a lot of situations where we could probably do something better. So this is amazing. Laura, Safe and Sound. Look closely at this. I love that this is the woods, and then you see the black hand there. It's a beautiful cover. They did such a good job.
I was happy with it.
Tell us where to find you online, where to follow you, all that good stuff.
Yes, my website is Laura McHugh Books. You can find me there. I am on Instagram, Laura McHugh Author. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on
She's everywhere.
TikTok. Laura McHugh Author.
Oh my God, I love that.
Some true crime TikToks about a horrible crime in my town where I lived. So if you want to know about some like cannibalism.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay.
Go check me out on TikTok.
I mean, if that is not a sales pitch for you on TikTok, cannibalism with Laura McHugh. I love that.
That's right.
Well, today is April 25th, and this book is out in the world. So go pick it up. And it sounds like we got to go back and start with The Weight of Blood, because Laura, you do. I'm going to gush for just a minute, because not only is the town this incredibly rich, creepy character, but each of these people, and it's a fairly good sized cast, right? We have the two, Amelia and Kylie, their mother's boyfriend. They have, there's Elsie and an uncle and Grace, and then there's some kids that grew up with these girls, and they're all so beautifully drawn. They're all so sort of real and nuanced. You're not going to find a perfect, unscathed human in a Laura McHugh book, is my sense. And I think it's wonderful, because even the darkest humans in my mind, I feel like I understand them. You know what I mean? I feel like, and that I think is a sign of a really, really beautifully written book, is when you can sort of even empathize with the worst of the characters. So nicely done.
Thank you so much.
You do dark and creepy so well. So, and everybody, this is Safe and Sound with Laura McHugh, out now. Go check it out. Laura, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh my gosh, it was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Of course. I look forward to the next one. Everyone, this is Killer Women with Danielle Girard, and my guest today, Laura McHugh. There will be a copy of Safe and Sound to give away on our Killer Women Facebook page, so go check that out, and happy reading. Bye.